Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. But it's not just any episode, it's a kickoff of Nonprofit Power Week with our friends over at YPTC, your part-time controller. And we have one of our faves back on, Derick Dreher. Derick, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And this is kind of a dicey issue, isn't it?
It is. Well, thanks for having me, Julia. I'm always glad to join you. You and I were chatting just a couple of weeks ago about the budget process we expected to unfold, but Congress has thrown us a curveball, haven't they? So we need to update our conversation.
Well, I'm really glad that we're kicking off. I mean, I'm not so glad, but I'm glad. I'm sad that we have to have this conversation, but I love that we're kicking off this week with you and your team because I think it's just such an important thing to be talking about, and that is where we are with the federal budget and how that impacts us across the nonprofit sector. Whether you take government grants or not, this impacts you. And Derick's going to really illustrate that for us as we go through what we should be thinking about, what we should be monitoring, and what this whole government looming shutdown could mean for us. So, Derick, I always love chatting with you because you're extremely calm. You don't have any hair on fire moments, even though this is a hair on fire conversation. And so I appreciate you willing to come on and talk to us. Just as I appreciate the amazing sponsors that we have, and they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Holdings Nonprofit Banking, Interim Executives Academy, of course, your part-time controller, Fundraisers Friday, and JMT Consulting. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. And as I mentioned leading up to this, Derick Dreher, he's a department leader of government funding at your part-time controller. Talk to us about what it is you and your team do, because I think once you explain it, it'll make it more apparent why we're kicking off Nonprofit Power Week with you.
Right. Thank you, Julia. I'd love to. So YPTC has been known for over 30 years for its accounting work for nonprofits, financial tracking and forecasting. But in recent years, we've expanded our services to include institutional funding assistance. So we can help nonprofits identify and apply for sources of institutional funding. That might be government funding, federal, state, municipal, might be foundation funding. We can also help set up the internal controls, the allocation plans, the budgets, the reporting, help you prepare for an audit. So whether it's pre-award or post-award, we can assist you with those grants you get from the government or foundation. So it's a wraparound service now. That has me thinking about where to find sources of funding all the time, and of course, monitoring what the status of government funding is.
Okay, so you just said, you just explained a little bit more about what it is you and your team does. And we are talking today with the looming government shutdown. And this question just popped into my head. But what happens with the government shutdown when you have requirements and forms and reports and things that you are supposed to submit by a certain date and the government shuts down? What do we do? I mean, you're still on the hook for that information.
Yes, you are. Government shutdowns are very disruptive, and we'll talk in a minute about why we got to this place and whether or not it's going to happen. But if a government shutdown takes place, the government is required to shut down all non-essential services. The agency employees who manage federal grants are not essential employees. I'm sorry to say, we view them that way in our sector, of course. They do really important work that enables the great work of nonprofits, but they will be furloughed without pay. That means if you have a question to ask an employee at a federal agency, you cannot ask that question during a shutdown. If there are resources you rely on, many government websites will be shut down. Databases will be unavailable. Your federal agency partners may be helping you with aspects of the grant. You may have ongoing conversations. Those conversations are going to stop. That does not mean you should feel free to ignore deadlines. If you have a report due, date during the shutdown. You better send it in. If the website doesn't work, mail it in and get a mail receipt. You need to try to meet all of the requirements that are spelled out in your grant, even if the federal government is throwing curveballs at you that make it hard to do that, and document what you're doing to remain compliant. That's very important.
Interesting. I'm glad I asked that question because I wasn't really sure like what the answer would be. And I love that you said that. And that the onus is upon you to document.
It really is. And it seems unfair, right? They're the ones leaving us hanging, but the onus is on you. You are responsible for all the terms and conditions you agreed to when you received that award, that grant or contract, whatever it is, and you need to abide by those. It seems wrong, again, but you cannot make unilateral decisions to change your grant. And if you decide to give yourself an extension for sending that report in, you've just made a unilateral change. Not good.
Wow. Okay, that just sets it up. And so let's talk about the issue of shutdown versus continuing resolution. And this is a little bit of a civics class for our viewers and listeners of the nonprofit show. If you could explain the two pieces of this and why you think we're moving more towards the shutdown. I'll kind of preempt that.
I will, yeah. So let's take even one step farther back, because a lot of people I talk to are telling me, hey, we don't need to be talking about a budget. We already passed a budget in July. Don't you remember One Big Beautiful Bill Act? Yes, I do remember it. What we need to know about OBBBA is it sets the overall spending levels for the next federal fiscal year. It's the contours of the budget, but it doesn't set the agency-specific budgets. It doesn't set budgets for specific federal programs and initiatives. Okay. What Congress is supposed to do is get back from recess after Labor Day and get down to work. They're supposed to have 12 appropriations committees in the House and Senate engage in bipartisan conversations to develop 12 different appropriations bills and then bring those to votes. Now that process has to be bipartisan because the final vote comes in the Senate, and the Senate must have a supermajority of at least 60 votes.
Yeah.
That process didn't happen this year because both parties in the Senate concluded there's no hope of any bipartisan conversations, which is really a shame. We as Americans deserve bipartisan efforts on our behalf, but they did not take place. Congress punted and said, let's not bother trying to create a new budget. They went for an easier option, which is a continuing resolution. A continuing resolution simply extends the prior budget. All right, the last budget was approved, so they basically say, well, it can't be controversial to extend what we had. Let's just do that for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. Continuing resolutions, or CRs, are actually quite common. In fact, we're in a CR right now. There was a CR passed at the end of March, extending the government budget through September 30. We're still in that phase. Mm-hmm. What's new this year, and we saw this play out on Friday, was the parties said, well, we're going to offer competing continuing resolutions. Why are they competing? Because they thought it wasn't good enough to propose the precise former budget be extended. They each added some things and subtracted some things. That means your proposal is bound to fall flat on the ears of someone else. And that's exactly what happened. So the House convened Friday morning. They narrowly passed a continuing resolution and sent it to the Senate. They said, here you go. This is last year's budget. All we've done is add some extra costs for security for all three branches of government. Please pass this. And the Senate then said, thank you. We will take up these conversations. And Friday afternoon, they had conversations which resulted in each of the parties offering a very different take on that continuing resolution. They held 2 votes on those 2 proposals. Both of the votes failed. Again, they need to get 60 votes in the Senate to pass a new budget, or continuing resolution. So we did not get the continuing resolution. And what happened after that second vote, Julia? Congress awarded itself a week of recess. They're now on recess for the Rosh Hashanah holiday. Lots of us have colleagues taking a day or two off for that. We're down with that. But taking over a week at a time when we need a federal budget, a lot of people wish Congress would come back to town sooner. They're not planning to come back and reconvene until September 29, which is next Monday. Now, don't forget the federal fiscal year starts on October 1st at 1 minute after midnight. So Congress now has Monday and Tuesday to reach a compromise of some sort to pass a continuing resolution. What's the likelihood of that happening?
Not looking good.
It's not real high. It's not looking good. And unfortunately, even if they roll up their sleeves and do this, they make a deal and get us a continuing resolution, the ones they've been talking about would only last for 5 or 6 weeks. They would expire by Thanksgiving at the latest. So this does not take care of our problems for the rest of the year. This kicks the can down the road, and we're going to have the same drama again around Thanksgiving.
Right. Which is interesting because that's a whole nother set of holiday, issues where there is recess. So yeah, it makes it.
That is correct.
It's even a
So
continuing.
Congress has a very, very limited time to do something it does not want to do, which is engage in bipartisan negotiations to extend the budget. And that's why my colleagues and I at YPTC are now saying shutdown is more likely to happen than not.
Right.
We hate to see it happen. It's so disruptive to nonprofits that are undertaking important work in every sector all across the country.
Right. On so many levels. Well, let's talk about what is it that we should be doing? I mean, if there is a shutdown and that if is growing more and more robust, should I say, what should we be doing?
And I hate to be a pessimist. I'm a natural optimist, but there's such a short time for Congress to reach a deal, and they've not shown any willingness to make a compromise.
Yeah.
That means a shutdown is likely to happen. Now, as we were saying at the start of the show, when a shutdown takes place, the government is required to shut down all non-essential services. What's essential? The military is essential. Law enforcement is essential. Certain other things are essential, but it's a pretty short list. For example, air traffic control and TSA, those are essential services, but those employees will actually not be paid. They'll be forced to show up for work and not be paid. And historically, we've seen work slowdowns happen because of that. So shutdowns affect everybody. Even if you're not a nonprofit with an active federal award, it can affect you. You will not be able to communicate with agency staff. You will not be able to receive any payments on your grants, contracts, or cooperative agreements. You will not be able to rely on government websites or databases or other resources you may need. So again, highly disruptive to nonprofits and really to all Americans because of the great services nonprofits offer.
Yeah.
The good news is, in face of all of that uncertainty, we have some evergreen tips we can give nonprofits for things you want to start doing now. And I would do these things now, even if they get that continuing resolution, because again, it's only going to last a few weeks.
Short period of time.
And we're going to be back in this situation all over again. So the first thing you want to do is get focused and relevant information. It's so easy to be overwhelmed by all the noise coming out of Washington. Very high noise to signal ratio. You want to look for that signal. One thing we always recommend is go to the National Council of Nonprofits. They are advocating for nonprofits and offering resources every day that you will find useful. And you can also find links through them to your state nonprofit association. Can't recommend highly enough that you get in touch with your state nonprofit association. They have specific relevant resources for you. Or find a source like the Nonprofit Show. Don't go into doom scrolling and look at everything that's coming your way. Find that focused, relevant information.
Mhm. You know, that's a great way to kind of separate the drama from the hype from what's the reality. So we arm ourselves with this information, knowing that it's going to be a slog. And I love that you framed this up so that we can understand if there is a continuing resolution. That's really only a 5 to 6 week panacea, if you will, right?
That's right. In all likelihood, it's going to be for a short term. It could be for the entire year. It could be for a longer period. But you know the saying that luck favors the prepared. You want to engage in preparations, assuming there's going to be a shutdown either next week or again sometime later this fall.
Right.
So your next,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say your next step, now that you've got your information, start communicating with the agency right away.
Okay.
Remember, the staff will be furloughed automatically beginning October 1st. You will not be able to call them up or email them October 1st and get answers. Mm-hmm. Ask them about extending deadlines. Ask them how to submit your reports. And many agencies, as we know, are already dealing with reductions in force. So really, you want to reach out right away with your questions, right away to ask for contingency plans. If you have a current government award, a grant, or a contract, ask about making a drawdown.
Oh, interesting.
Now, we know many organizations are tempted to say, oh, I'm drawing down all that money right now. I'm going to make sure I get every last cent of my entire grant. That doesn't usually work because grants are meant to be reimbursed. You're meant to expend the monies first, perform the service, and then submit documentation of what you've done and ask for reimbursement. Agencies may allow a small advance. They may allow a larger advance, but don't go assuming you can draw down everything because like as not, you'll have to pay it back and there may be penalties. Mm-hmm. So instead, reach out to your program officer or your fiscal officer, ask them what you can do, document their response. Mm-hmm. So important to get that documentation. And then don't just communicate with the agency. You got to think about communicating with your stakeholders. If you don't tell your stakeholders what challenges you're going to be facing, what services may be impacted or shut down, they'll draw their own conclusions. So tell them what's going to happen. Tell them what your plans are. Mm-hmm. Keep them in the loop because they're inclined to help you, but they have to know what challenges you're facing or they can't help. Right. And then you knew this was coming. At YPTC, we talk about cash flow a lot. Update your cash flow projections. Super important to do. You may need to make the cadence of them more frequent. If you've been doing monthly or quarterly, you may need to do weekly or monthly instead.
Sure.
And you got to take a somewhat pessimistic look at your cash flow. Create a scenario that shows no government revenues coming in. Mm-hmm. Because that may come to pass. Scenario planning is so important for nonprofits to engage in. We've been preaching that for years. Yeah. And we can skip the conversation about that today because you're talking with my colleague Tisa tomorrow. And right. I know you're going to have a terrific conversation. We have great resources for scenario planning, but mm-hmm. that's work that's got to be done quickly. Mm-hmm. And if scenario, go ahead.
Well, it's so interesting because I think that this whole concept of scenario planning and understanding what some of these external forces are, we don't often think about the government shutting down and kind of looping us into this practice, right? And so it's absolutely fascinating that you would bring that up so that we're ahead of the curve. It might not be palatable, it might not be great, but at least everybody
it's never a fun scenario, right? Yeah. Nonprofits are already run on very thin margins, and people say, well, you got to trim the fat. There's no fat on nonprofit budgets, right? There's no fat. What people are looking at when they consider unfavorable scenarios is often the necessity of cutting programs or cutting staff. And we hate to do those things. Those are decisions that hurt our heart. But our brain tells us we need to know what we do, because if that bad news comes in, we realize, oh, we're not going to get that massive grant payment we were expecting and really relying on. People fall into a kind of stupor and they don't know what to do. That's when you need to break the glass and pull your scenario plan out of that secret cabinet, because it tells you what you're going to do. And hopefully it's a conversation you've had with your board as well. It's not just something you did late at night on the back of an envelope. It's something that those stakeholders who need to have a voice in have been able to do.
Yeah. I think that's what's so fascinating is that you've had these discussions, you've figured this out to your best of your abilities, so that hopefully you've saved some time, that you're not having to go back and review it. I can imagine that there's some tweaking that you have to do, especially if we're thinking about this continuing resolution or not. I mean, what does that look like, and what are we thinking about in terms of, the time?
Yeah, there's always tweaking. These are meant to be living plans.
Yeah.
You might have a more favorable scenario come to pass. Your donors, your stakeholders may say, we're not going to let this organization fail. We're going to step up and write more checks. And here we are in the fourth quarter. This is annual appeal season. It's a good time to be asking for money, but you've got to have those different options laid out so that you understand, and you have to keep revisiting them. It's one of the sacred duties of an executive director and a finance team. You got to stay on that, keep it a living document. So many people, they'll make a strategic plan, they throw it in a drawer, and never look at it, and it just collects dust for 5 years. Your financial plan can't be treated that way.
Right. It's such an interesting thing. So we're looking at, the civics aspect of this, like what's the reality? Where are we getting information? We're talking about our cash flow. We're talking about communication so that we reach back out to the stakeholders. So also that we're so integrated into our municipal governments, our state governments, other nonprofits that we might work with and in collaboration. There's a lot going on that we have to be thinking about and getting ready to weather this storm. Is there anything else? That's
I'm so
a lot.
glad you mentioned other organizations and cities and state governments, because there's strength in numbers.
Okay.
And it's one of the great superpowers of nonprofits is they can collaborate with sister institutions throughout their region or their state, or they can collaborate with similar organizations across the country that are in their sector. This is a great time to share resources, look to one another to help and weather this storm. And on that state and municipal government side, remember, states and municipal governments may also not be getting payments from the feds they're expecting, and they may be delaying things. Sometimes we hear people say, well, I'm not worried about the federal tomorrow because we get state funding. Well, the state may be reducing or delaying funding as well if we have a shutdown. So you got to get those plans in place. If you can, diversify your revenues as well. Not every organization can do that based on their mission and how they're structured. But if you have 4 or 5 good different kinds of revenues, corporate, foundation, individual, government, then if you take a hit to one or one of them is delayed, sometimes it's not a mortal blow. It's just an injury that you're able to withstand. So we love to see people try to diversify their revenues as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a basic concept. I would say that, even just looking at your donor portfolio, you don't want to rely on Mrs. Smith's one big check every January. You want to have a lot of, things coming in your basket. And so
that's right, because Mrs. Smith may decide to nurture other green shoots one year.
Exactly.
Right. It happens.
It does happen. We don't have a lot of time, and I kind of want to talk about one thing that we're hearing a lot about in the news with this administration, and it is the executive order process. These things come through. There's one that's specifically in the mix of all of this when it comes to budgeting, and that's improving oversight of federal grant making. Could you explain, and I know this is hard briefly, is how this piece might be fitting into the puzzle?
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're going from the realm of certainty, those evergreen tips, back into uncertainty. There was an executive order issued in early August called Improving Oversight of Federal Grant Making. Executive orders come from the executive branch, as you would expect, and they have the status of law. They're not actually laws, but agencies are required to comply with them. This executive order directs agencies to do a couple of things. First, it tells them to install a political officer who will have the ultimate say and approval over all grants. We don't know how that will play out with various grants to various different sectors. I know there's a lot of worry and concern. It may not be justified. We don't know what's going to happen, but we can guess it's going to mean it'll take longer to get grants issued because now you're adding another bureaucratic step, right? And we didn't need any additional bureaucracy.
Right.
Second thing it does is it privileges the applications of those organizations that have lower indirect costs. And that's something I really regret seeing. We fought so hard to have the de minimis rate for federal grants increased from 10% to 15%. That still doesn't reimburse the actual cost for many nonprofits, right? It costs money to spend money. We know that.
Yeah.
But those indirect costs have gotten a bad reputation, and now the government is saying we're going to prioritize applications from organizations with lower cost rates. A third thing it does, it requires every agency to insert a new termination clause into grants, which basically allows the agency to cancel the grant at a whim. It used to be you could rely on a government grant. That was a contract in every sense of the word. Now you may not be able to. And this is going to have ramifications for nonprofits preparing their audits, trying to figure out what their cash flow is going to look like. May not be able to depend on things the way they used to.
Wow.
And some of the changes that we see in this executive order actually contradict the settled law that we have in uniform guidance. That's the set of rules that we follow from the Office of Management and Budget. And we at YPTC like to cite these by chapter and verse, right? We know them by heart. They got updated recently in ways that were helpful to organizations. They may be changed again. And because we have this period of conflict, the executive order directed every agency to pause grant making for 30 days, figure out what it needs to do to come into compliance. So we're just coming out of that period of statutory pause. And with the budget uncertainty, we're not really certain how the agencies are going to react at this point. The agencies haven't even had budgets for the new year iterated for them. So we may be embarking on a period of great uncertainty and potentially more revisions to uniform guidance. If those end up getting proposed, there has to be a public comment period. There'll be other delays, but we're looking at a lot of things we can't quite suss out. We don't know how these things are going to play out, but we're watching.
Well, that's why we are so really, I want to say relieved almost to have our partnership with your part-time controller, because during this week, we have a lot of conversations that are going to weave in this current status where we're at. I mean, you kicked us off this week, helping us to understand how the government structures and the civics behind some of these decisions and where things are going to be going. Tisa is going to be talking to us tomorrow about scenario planning, which is fascinating. It's something that I think a lot of us think we understand, but we really don't. She puts it in a way, I think, that makes it very, very useful. Then we're going to be talking about data hygiene with Alicia Eastfold. Fascinating approach to how we use information, how we use data. What does it mean for our organizations? It's AI, it's donor stewardship, it's like everything. So you don't want to miss that. Fraud updates, a fascinating and heartbreaking conversation that we always have with YPTC because it's always changing. There are always new things going on. And we really like getting your opinions on this. Jen Blasey is going to come in and talk to us about that. And then Ask and Answered, Ellie Hume, who's one of your directors and also one of our newest co-hosts on the Nonprofit Show, visits us, and we have a lot of different questions that will come in and she tackles them. And so it's a really fast-paced, diverse show. So a lot of fun, a lot of information, and really, wow, Derick, in a time where this information is so vital. So thank you so much, Derick Dreher, Department Leader, Government Funding, with our friends over at Your Part-Time Controller. I really appreciate you helping us frame up what's going on.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
It's been a lot of fun. We're going to be coming back to you, I think, more often than not over these next several weeks. And so I would imagine you're going to get to see Derick on the Nonprofit Show yet again, talking about where we are with things and where we need to be thinking about. You know, before we leave our kickoff episode of Nonprofit Power Week here on the Nonprofit Show, I want to make sure that I call out our amazing partners who support this. We only do this a couple times a year. It's a very unique situation where we do one dedicated week to a topic. And our partners allow us to do this. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Holdings Nonprofit Banking, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and JMT Consulting. Okay, Derick, this is a mantra we leave every show with. But today it really speaks to like a whole nother layer when I say it. And the message goes like this: to stay well so you can do well.